Hollywood lied to you about the whole pirate thing. You are probably picturing yourself standing majestically on the deck of a massive ship while wearing a perfectly tailored velvet coat. You think you are going to spend your days drinking top, shelf rum, and swinging from ropes with a beautiful smile. In reality, you are currently standing on a damp piece of rotting oak that smells strongly of wet dog and human despair. Your velvet coat hasn't been washed in 6 months and is currently home to 3 separate species of lice. And the rum you are drinking tastes less like a tropical vacation and more like industrial paint stripper mixed with actual dirt. Welcome to your new career as a pirate captain in the year 1715. It is the golden age of piracy, which sounds incredible until you realize that golden just means highly flammable and incredibly unhygienic. You are not a dashing rogue living a life of absolute freedom. You are essentially a middle manager in a floating, heavily armed cooperative business where your entire staff is clinically depressed and suffering from severe vitamin deficiencies. Today, we are going to look at what it actually took to survive a week in the shoes of a golden age pirate captain. You will learn exactly how these criminal enterprises operated, why their diet could double as a construction material, and how the entire system was basically a glorified human resources nightmare. By the end of this, your current office job, with its passive-aggressive emails and broken coffee machine, is going to look like a literal paradise. Let us start with the biggest myth of all, which is the idea that a pirate captain was an absolute dictator. You might think that if a crew member talks back to you, you can just wave your sword and make them walk the plank. If you try that on a real Golden Age pirate ship, your crew will simply look at you, look at each other, and then collectively vote to throw you into the ocean. Pirate ships were actually some of the most radical democracies in human history. The captain did not inherit their position from a king, and they did not get it through a corporate promotion. You were elected by a majority vote of the crew because they thought you were marginally less incompetent than everyone else on board. And the exact same democracy that put you in charge could strip you of your title by sunset. If you were too mean or too soft, or if you simply failed to find enough treasure to pay the bills, the crew would hold a meeting. They would literally call a vote right there on the deck to fire you from your own captaincy. Imagine getting laid off from your job as a warlord because you did not meet your quarterly pillaging metrics. To make things even more awkward, you do not even have total control over the ship when you are in charge. You have to share your power with a guy called the quartermaster. The quartermaster was elected by the crew to act as a cosmic human resources department. His entire job was to make sure you did not get too full of yourself and start acting like a real boss. He handled the distribution of food, he handed out the treasure, and he was the one who decided how to punish people who broke the rules. If you wanted to change the ship's direction just because you felt like it, the quartermaster could tell you no. The only time you have absolute authority over the crew is during an active battle. In those few moments of chaos, everyone has to obey your orders instantly or face severe consequences. But the second the smoke clears and the battle is over, you go right back to being just another guy who has to explain his decisions to 40 angry men with loaded pistols. It is like being the CEO of a tech startup, except your board of directors consists entirely of heavily tattooed men who do not know how to read and are carrying cutlasses. Every single thing on the ship was governed by a written document called the ship's articles. Before the ship even left the harbor, every man on board had to sign this contract. If you could not write your name, which was true for most of them, you just left a smudge of ink or a little cross. These articles laid out the rules for everything from gambling to bedtime. For example, Bartholomew Roberts' articles explicitly stated that all lights had to be out by 8 o'clock at night. If a pirate wanted to keep drinking after 8, he had to do it on the open deck under the stars without a lantern. They essentially had a strict corporate curfew enforced by sea criminals. The articles also stated that there was no stealing from each other if you stole even a small item from a fellow crew member. You would be marooned on a deserted island with nothing but a bottle of water and a pistol. So while you were totally encouraged to rob foreign merchant ships at gunpoint, lifting a pair of socks from Barnaby in the next hammock was considered a massive corporate violation. The hypocrisy was real, but it was the only way to keep 80 unstable men from stabbing each other over a lost pair of dice. Now that you understand the corporate structure, let us talk about the cafeteria plan on your floating office. When you see pirates in movies, they are always feasting on big pieces of roasted meat and tropical fruits. In reality, your culinary experience as a captain is an absolute disaster. The foundation of every meal on a pirate ship was a wonderful substance called hardtack. Hardtack is a biscuit made of flour and water that has been baked multiple times until it contains absolutely zero moisture. It was so incredibly hard that pirates often had to smash it with a hammer or soak it in old beer, just to make it soft enough to chew without breaking their teeth. If you hit someone in the head with a piece of hardtack, you would probably be charged with assault with a deadly weapon. But the hardness was not even the main issue, because the ship was constantly damp and hot. The hardtack quickly became an active apartment complex for weevils and maggots. The bugs would eat their way through the biscuits, leaving behind tunnels of tiny black dust. Pirates developed a highly advanced strategy for dealing with this situation. They would simply wait until it was completely dark to eat their dinner. That way, they could not see the little worms crawling out of their food as they bit into it. It turns out that ignorance is the best seasoning when you are trapped in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The meat situation was not much better. The ship carried barrels of salted beef and pork that were designed to last for years. By the time you opened a barrel that had been sitting in the hot belly of the ship for 6 months, the meat had turned a lovely shade of grayish green. It was so dry and salty that it felt like chewing on a piece of an old leather boot. To wash down this gourmet feast, you had water that had been sitting in wooden casks for weeks. The water would quickly grow thick green algae and start to smell like a stagnant swamp. To mask the taste of the literal pond scum, pirates would mix the water with rum and lime juice to create a drink called grog. They were not drinking cocktails because they liked the beach vibe. They were drinking them because it was the only way to consume liquid without vomiting immediately. And because your diet contained absolutely zero fresh vegetables or fruits for months at a time, you were guaranteed to meet the ultimate sea monster. That monster is not the Kraken. It is scurvy. Scurvy is a horrific disease caused by a total lack of vitamin C. And it is honestly the most terrifying thing about the Golden Age. It does not just make you feel tired. Vitamin C is the molecular glue that holds your body's tissues together. When you run out of it, your body literally starts to come apart at the seams. The first sign is that your gums turn black and spongy, and your teeth begin to rattle around in your mouth like loose change. Then, the disease decides to get deeply psychological. Scurvy causes old, completely healed wounds and scars from your childhood to physically reopen. If you broke your arm 10 years ago, the bone will literally unfuse itself and become broken again. If you got a nasty scrape when you were a kid, that old scar will dissolve and start bleeding as if it happened 5 minutes ago. It is like your body is hitting the cosmic undo button on every single injury you have ever survived. As the captain, you have to watch your crew slowly turn into walking, bleeding ghosts while you try to convince them to go rob another ship. You are trying to look like a fierce conqueror of the seas, but your entire front row of teeth is currently falling into your morning soup. If your crew survived the scurvy, they still had to face the reality of regular workplace injuries. Being a pirate involved a lot of moving parts, heavy ropes, swinging iron, and people actively shooting cannons at you. Because of this, the pirate code included a highly sophisticated medical insurance policy that put modern corporate healthcare to absolute shame. The ship's articles explicitly listed the exact financial compensation you would receive for losing various parts of your body. If you lost your right arm in the line of duty, you were awarded roughly 600 pieces of 8 from the common treasure pool. If you lost your left arm, you got a bit less, because society has always been wildly biased against left-handed people. But losing a leg would net you around 500 pieces of 8. An eye was worth about 100 pieces of 8. Even a lost finger had a specific price tag attached to it. This was a completely legally binding workers' compensation plan written by a bunch of illiterate thieves. If you got injured, you did not have to fight an insurance adjuster or submit a pile of paperwork to a corporate office. The quartermaster would simply look at your missing limb, check the chart, and hand you a heavy sack of stolen Spanish silver coins. They would also provide you with a lovely peg leg crafted from whatever spare wood was lying around the ship. If the ship's carpenter was feeling artistic, you might get a leg that did not wobble too much when you walked. But getting the payout was the easy part. Surviving the actual medical treatment was where the real challenge began. Pirate ships rarely had a real university-trained doctor on board. Actual doctors preferred to stay on land where people paid them in actual money and did not threaten to shoot them if a fever did not break. So if your ship needed a medical professional, the job usually fell to the ship's cook or the carpenter. The logic was simple. The carpenter already owned a massive collection of saws, and the cook knew how to slice meat, so they were obviously qualified to perform major surgery. That if your leg was shattered by a cannonball, the carpenter would pull out his rusty woodworking tools. There was no anesthesia in the 18th century. There were no sterile operating rooms, and nobody knew what a germ was. The medical staff would simply hand you a leather strap to bite down on, pour a cup of cheap rum down your throat, and start sawing through your bone as fast as possible to stop you from bleeding to death. They would dip the stump of your leg into a bucket of boiling tar or press a red-hot iron plate against the raw flesh. The smell of burning human meat would fill the entire ship, creating a lovely atmosphere for everyone else trying to eat their insect biscuits. If you did not die from the shock of having your leg hacked off with a rusty handsaw, you still had to survive the inevitable infection. Most pirates who underwent surgery died a few days later because their wounds were exposed to the filthy, bacteria-filled air of the lower deck. So, as the captain, your benefit package is fantastic. But the human resources delivery system leaves a lot to be desired. Given how terrifying the medical system was, it should come as no surprise that real pirates hated actual combat. Hollywood loves to show epic sea battles, where two massive ships fire hundreds of cannonballs at each other until one of them sinks. In reality, if you are a pirate captain and you enter a long, bloody cannon battle, you have already failed at your job. Cannons are incredibly expensive, and gunpowder is hard to find. More importantly, cannonballs have a nasty habit of destroying the very things you are trying to steal. If you shoot 20 holes into a merchant ship, you are going to ruin the valuable cargo of sugar, silk, or tobacco inside the hold. You might also sink the ship entirely, which means all that beautiful treasure is now sitting at the bottom of the ocean, where it does absolutely nobody any good. And worst of all, a real battle means your crew members are going to start losing limbs, which means you have to pay out a fortune from your insurance pool. A bloody victory could easily bankrupt your entire criminal operation. Therefore, the ultimate goal of a pirate captain was to get the target to surrender without firing a single shot. To achieve this, pirates became the absolute masters of psychological warfare and influencer marketing. They understood that reputation was far more powerful than any weapon. If a merchant ship believed that you were a group of mindless, bloodthirsty demons who would torture everyone on board if they resisted, they would throw their hands up and surrender the moment your flag appeared on the horizon. Nobody understood this better than Edward Teach, better known to history as Blackbeard. Blackbeard was a marketing genius who realized that looking scary was much safer than actually fighting. He was a massive man with a long, thick black beard that grew all the way up to his eyes. Before a raid, he would weave slow-burning hemp fuses into his hair and beard and light them on fire. The fuses would burn slowly, curling thick wreaths of black smoke around his face. when he stepped onto the deck of a target ship. He looked like a literal demon that had just climbed straight out of the underworld. He also wore a bright red coat and carried 6 loaded pistols strapped across his chest like a walking arsenal. Merchant captains would take one look at this smoking, screaming nightmare and immediately hand over the keys to the cargo hold. Blackbeard operated for years and became the most feared pirate in the world. Yet historical records suggest he rarely ever actually killed anyone until his final battle. He won his treasure through pure branding. It was the 18th century equivalent of putting a terrifying profile picture on your account, so nobody tries to argue with you in the comment section. As a captain, you have to maintain this intense persona every single day. You cannot just wake up, put on some sweatpants, and have a quiet morning. You have to step out onto the deck, looking like a psychotic killer, even if you are secretly suffering from a mild stomachache and just want to take a nap. If your crew sees you looking vulnerable or acting too nice, they will start to lose respect for you. And in your line of work, a loss of respect is usually followed by a sudden, unexpected swim in the ocean. Let us dive deeper into the daily environment you are managing as a captain, specifically the sensory experience. Life on a Golden Age pirate ship was incredibly crowded and unbelievably filthy. A typical merchant ship might be operated by a crew of 20 men, but when pirates captured that same ship, they would cram 80 or 90 men onto it. They needed a massive crew, so they could easily overwhelm their targets and have enough men to sail any extra ships they captured. This means you have nearly 100 men living in a wooden box that is roughly the size of a modern suburban house. There are no private bedrooms. There is no personal space. The crew sleeps in hammocks slung so close together in the lower deck that they are constantly bumping into each other with every roll of the waves. The air down there is thick, hot, and completely stagnant. Now, remember that these men have not taken a shower or washed their clothes in several months. Soap was a luxury item, and fresh water was far too precious to waste on vanity like basic hygiene. Everyone is wearing the same wool and leather outfits they had on when they joined the crew. Those clothes are soaked in a lovely combination of sweat, dried fish blood, spilled rum, and bilge water. The collective stench of 80 unwashed bodies trapped in a hot, damp wooden basement for 12 weeks is something that modern human nostrils are simply not evolved to comprehend. It was a smell so incredibly powerful that merchant ships could often detect a pirate vessel on the wind before they could even see it on the horizon. You could literally track your criminal targets using nothing but your sense of smell. The sanitation situation gets even more delightful when you look at the bathroom facilities. There were no toilets on a pirate ship. Instead, there was a designated area at the very front of the boat called the head. The head consisted of a couple of wooden seats with holes cut into them, suspended directly over the open ocean. If you needed to use the bathroom, you had to walk out to the front of the ship, sit on a wooden plank in the freezing wind, and do your business while staring down at the crashing waves below. If the sea was rough, a sudden wave could easily splash right up through the hole, providing you with a highly aggressive, unwanted bidet experience. And if the weather was truly terrible, walking out to the head was genuinely dangerous. More than one pirate lost his balance during a midnight bathroom run and plunged headfirst into the dark ocean, never to be seen again. Imagine surviving 3 naval battles and a bout of tropical fever, only to meet your end because you slipped while trying to take a poop. To clean themselves after using the head, the crew utilized a highly communal tool known as the poop rope. The poop rope was a thick piece of hemp rope that hung off the side of the ship with its end, dragging in the ocean water. When you were finished, you would pull up the wet rope, use it to wipe, and then drop it back into the sea, so the water could theoretically wash it clean for the next guy. Yes, you heard that correctly. 80 men sharing one single, ocean-washed piece of rope for weeks on end. It is a miracle that anyone survived the golden age of piracy without dying of immediate, catastrophic bacterial infections. As the captain, you do have your own private cabin at the back of the ship. which is slightly cleaner than the main deck, but you are still breathing the same air. And you are still sharing the ship with thousands of rats that live in the cargo hold. The rats would chew through the food bags, die in the water casks, and run across your face while you were trying to sleep. It was a life of constant, grinding discomfort that makes you realize why these men were so reckless in battle. They were not fighting because they loved violence. They were fighting because anything was better than. Going back to their damp hammocks and the communal rope. This brings us to the final act of your career as a pirate captain, which is the inevitable retirement plan. When we look back at the history of the Golden Age, we tend to think of it as a long, glorious era of maritime freedom. In reality, the entire Golden Age of piracy lasted for only about 10 years, from 1715 to 1725. And the individual career of a pirate captain was incredibly short. The average pirate captain survived for less than 2 years before their career came to a sudden and violent end. It was not a long-term retirement plan where you save up enough money to buy a nice house in the bay, country, and grow tomatoes. It was a high-stakes, short-term gamble that almost always ended in disaster. Most captains did not die of old age. They died of yellow fever. Or they were killed in a chaotic skirmish. Or they were captured by the Royal Navy and brought to trial. The British government eventually realized that pirates were ruining global trade, so they sent heavily armed warships to hunt down every single pirate captain on the water. When you were captured, the legal system did not give you a long trial with a fancy lawyer. They would hold a quick hearing, find you guilty of piracy on the high seas, and sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. The execution of a pirate captain was a massive public spectacle designed to terrify anyone else who was thinking about turning to a life of crime. They would march you out to a gallows built right on the water's edge, put a thick rope around your neck, and drop the platform. But the punishment did not even stop there. After you were dead, the authorities would take your body and cover it in thick industrial tar to preserve it. Then they would lock your corpse inside a human-shaped iron cage called a gibbet. They would hang the gibbet from a tall pole at the entrance of the harbor, right where every incoming ship could see it. Your rotting, tar-covered body would hang there in the wind for years, slowly being picked apart by seagulls until nothing was left but a collection of white bones rattling in an iron cage. It was the ultimate corporate anti-piracy advertisement. So why did anyone choose this life? Why would 80 men willingly sign a contract to eat bug biscuits, lose their teeth to scurvy, share a poop rope, and end up rotting in an iron cage? The answer is simple. Because life on a legal merchant ship or a Royal Navy vessel was actually even worse. In the regular Navy, sailors were treated like actual slaves. They were routinely beaten within an inch of their lives for minor mistakes by tyrannical captains who answered to nobody. They were paid pennies, and the government would often withhold their wages for months or years at a time. They died of the exact same diseases and ate the exact same rotten food. But they did it for the profit of a wealthy king who did not even know their names. When a sailor turned pirate, they were making a conscious, desperate choice. They decided that it was better to live for 1 or 2 years with absolute freedom, democratic rights, equal pay, and a voice in their government, rather than spend 20 years being tortured in the dark by a legal system that viewed them as garbage. Piracy was not a lifestyle choice born out of a love for adventure. It was the original form of quiet quitting, except instead of slacking off at your desk, you took over the entire building with loaded pistols. So the next time you are sitting in your climate-controlled office staring at a spreadsheet and feeling like your life is a tragedy, just take a deep breath and remember your ancestors. Be thankful that your boss cannot vote to throw you into the Atlantic Ocean. Be happy that your lunch does not contain live insects that you have to eat in the dark. And above all, be incredibly grateful that you do not have to share a single piece of rope with 40 guys named Barnaby. So what about you? Would you have signed the articles and taken your chances on the open sea? Or would you have stayed safe on land with all your teeth? Let me know down there. Until next time, try to keep your face from catching fire.